Okay, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Stuart, we're all ready to go. Thank you.
Good evening. This is the story of someone who's had more setbacks than most people could endure. They include physical abuse, several cancers, having both breasts removed, living with an alcoholic husband, and mental health problems. But it's also a story of strength, courage, and determination, and how she used photography, specifically becoming an associate of the RPS, to help her to find inner peace. And her name is Sarah Dow ARPS. Sarah, good evening.
Hi, Peter. How are you?
Fine, thank you. You're not alone, though, as we discovered during the RPS 100 Heroines campaign, when hundreds of women around the world contacted us to say that photography had helped them to recover from mental health problems. But let's start on a positive note and go back to your early days. If we can see a couple of images, here you are, aged 4. You were quite chirpy at that time, weren't you?
Stubborn, I think most people would say. It's yeah, I'm about 4 here, I think, and it's interesting that you've chosen these particular 2 images, because the one on the left is how my mother would dress me, and she liked to see me with my hair in a bun, and the one on the right is how I would dress me with my hair everywhere.
Yeah, a bit of a scowl.
By
the time you were 17, things began to go a bit wrong, didn't they? You were physically abused by your father, for example. What led to that? What was behind that?
We didn't know this. I didn't know a lot of this until many, 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 many years later. But my father had struggled with alcohol and depression pretty much all of his life. And the first I knew that the childhood that I grew up in wasn't quite necessarily as everybody else's was exactly, was one night in 1979 when I came home from being out with a friend, and I sassed my dad a little bit, as you do when you're 17. And the next thing I knew, I was being thrown up against a wall and being punched in the face. My brother, who was 15 at the time, tried to get him to stop. My father threw him onto the ground and beat the living out of him. And from there, my mother came down, my father left the house, and the emotional course of my life changed.
And of course, in that same year, I think you had your first cancer.
It was 6 months later. So it was the following year, 1980, February, I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma.
On the positive side, you generally took a camera around with you. So let's look at the 2 of the female photographers who really influenced you, starting with Margaret Bourke-White, the trailblazing American photographer. And that quote there must mean a lot to you.
It hugely does. Margaret Bourke-White was such a trailblazer. I have a real affinity with strong women, not because I think I am one, but because I draw something from their strength. And Margaret Bourke-White, without doubt, was an incredible woman. And this quote of hers, the very secret of life for me, I believed, was to maintain in the midst of rushing events an inner tranquility. Just seems to sum up for me why so many of us seek peace in the landscape.
And of course, she did self-portraits, which you later came to do yourself. In fact, quite a lot of them. But this is a rather interesting one, isn't it?
This is a really interesting picture because she's wearing trousers. And of course, this was an era when it wasn't acceptable for women to wear trousers. She wore trousers because she solved problems that required her to go up scaffolding or up ladders in her work.
She really did lead an incredible life, didn't she? I mean, we've got some all-action pictures.
Yeah, see, this is the one I identify with. This is Maggie the Indestructible. Life magazine, she was the first female, she was the first hire of Lucas, but she was the first female photographer on Life magazine, and she paved the way in so many ways, from creating new darkroom practices, but she was the first accredited US war photographer and female war photographer. And this image of her just speaks everything to me. There's a woman, she's ready for takeoff, or she's just landed, she's got her camera, she's dressed for action, and it's this kind of image that really draws me to her.
And of course, she had a fantastic eye. Street photography like this Did you learn that sort of thing from her as well?
Well, there are so many things to learn from. I mean, she covered so many different genres of photography, and in an era where none of them were traditional for a woman at all. But this kind of vision, this is from her Dust Bowl series, and this kind of ability to understand that the context in which a photograph is taken can say so much more, quite literally, than the portraits she may be placing or documenting at that time. This was an incredible image, and very much in keeping with Vivian Maier as well, I think, that we'll go on to look at. And course, actually, it's quite a current image now, if you think about it.
And the next image, of course, is one of the most famous ones of her, taken on top of the Chrysler building. That is incredible, isn't it?
I lose my stomach every time I look at this. I really do. But again, this is typical of her. You know, she's in trousers. I mean, look, there's no safety harness here. She has decided on the shot that she wants it, and she'll just keep solving a problem until she gets to take the shot.
Yeah, utterly fearless. But I must admit, the next one is probably one of my favorites. It's just an incredible image, isn't it?
Yeah, because there's no drones in this era, right?
Yeah, it's utterly astonishing. Now, the other female photographer you love, needless to say, is Vivian Maier, who you mentioned before, because you're both fans of selfies. And she was really expert, wasn't she?
Well, I think anybody that takes self-portraits will tell you there's a world of difference between a selfie and a self-portrait. And what I find so intriguing about Vivian Maier, particularly in contrast to Margaret Bourke-White. Margaret Bourke-White was an incredible publicist of herself. Vivian Maier was an incredibly private, mysterious, secretive person. And yet this body of work, her self-portrait work, is, for me, I think, her strongest work. It shows such incredible vision and intention and humour.
Yeah, and of course she was a nanny for 30 years, and most of her images weren't seen till years later. But
150,000 images she took in her archive. Very few of them saw the light of day until after she was dead.
Incredible. But you did try out some Maier-style selfies for yourself. How did that go?
I went through a real Maier phase. It started off with the college assignment, which is where we were introduced to Vivian Maier in the first place. But once I'd started looking and trying to think like her, I couldn't stop. And this is a really interesting one. This family are very special to me in so many ways. And this isn't about being outside looking in, but it is about that degree of separation and isolation. And it's even the UPVC of the window plays to that perspective of division. And I'd like to think it's the sort of thing Mrs. Maier would have seen.
Well, she certainly would have done one like your next image. We're getting a bit more like her, aren't we? So you're thinking outside the box a bit.
Yeah, this was literally taken on the fly. I was walking. I always walk with the camera. I was walking in Cane Hill Locks, and the lock was empty, and I just saw this shadow and just thought, you know, and I wasn't playing, but I thought, and could look so good if I can just position myself so that it looks like I'm climbing the ladder. And in retrospect now, it's absolutely very much about climbing from the darkness to the light, but it's just fun. It's funny.
And the next one, you actually took to an RPS advisory day, and there's your shadow again. What did they think of it?
Well, they didn't see the shadow, so they didn't get it. We'll look at the panel later, but in the context of the panel, they didn't feel it fit. The majority of the people in the room, to be honest, it wasn't just the advisors, the majority of the people in the room didn't see the shadow.
Must have given you quite a lot of courage and strength, that.
What, that they didn't see the shadow?
But they didn't see it, yeah.
I don't know.
Let's skip
kind of the
forward.
point of the shit inside, really. Where was I?
Let's skip forward a little bit. You joined the RPS, eventually got your licentiate. So let's have a look at your panel, your LRPS panel. So what can you tell us about this?
Well, most people that were at college, there was a few of us at college that joined the RPS, and I was absolutely gutted when I wasn't the first one to achieve a distinction. But I was already working on the She Inside project. I'm not sure that it particularly had a name at that point, but I was already working on the project. So when I achieved my licentiate with this panel, most of the people that knew me on the course, and I was working with Bella West by then, I wasn't at college anymore, were really surprised at this panel. They were expecting something from the She project. But it became obvious to me when I looked closely at the criteria, and Bella was an amazing mentor through this process, was that I needed to prove that I'd got this first. I needed to prove that I'd got the skills, the credentials, not just to everybody else, but to myself. I needed to prove that I'd got the skills to tell the story that I wanted to tell. And the licentiate wasn't the place for that. It wasn't the place for the story. The licentiate was the place to prove that I was a credible, authentic photographer. So this is what I did.
If people didn't quite catch that, the She Inside is the title of the associate panel, which we'll be seeing a little later on. Now, you married for a second time. Things seemed comparatively okay, even though your husband clearly had a drink problem and you'd had cancer. But then you reached 2001. You call this your year of little deaths. What
2011, yeah.
What happened?
Well, Andrew had been struggling, I think, for a long time. And when any of us talk about alcohol abuse, we seem to think it's something that is obviously problematic. But any addiction, any abuse situation, anything that involves our emotional and mental health doesn't come on like that. It comes on over time and you don't see it. Andrew didn't develop his issues with alcohol overnight. They crept up on both of us. But in 2011, he came home one night quite late from work and lost his temper with me and hit me in the face and kicked me, and the police were called and my life changed again.
And I suppose we should say that eventually he was taken to court and convicted.
Oh, he was convicted of the abuse. We didn't split up at that time. We separated for 6 weeks, but we didn't split up. We kept trying to sift through the ashes of this destructive relationship.
But of course, you had a lot of other things, didn't you, in that same sort of period? You lost your job, you broke your arm, your parents died, your cat died. I mean, it must have been appalling.
In the first 5 months, just about every single thing in my world had changed. In terms of my relationship with my husband, my dad died quite suddenly after a fall. My mother died within 5 weeks of that. I had lost I had been made redundant from my job, but that actually turned out to be a blessing in disguise because it meant I got to spend time with my mum and dad. And the cat died, and that took us till June. By December, I had another breast cancer. That would have been cancer number 3. And by that point, it was quite obvious that it was related to the treatment I'd had for Hodgkin's back in 1980. And so my breasts went too.
Well, let's have a look now. The next photograph shows you in hospital. You're looking pretty dreadful. I gather this was actually Christmas Day, wasn't it?
No, this wasn't Christmas Day.
No,
this was in December. The next one's Christmas Day. No, literally, this is just after my bilateral mastectomy. Don't ask me why I decided it was a good idea to point the phone at myself at that point, but something was starting.
Well, let's have a look at another image now. This is after your double mastectomy.
Yeah, this is Christmas Day. Was
that a difficult decision, or was it actually quite easy for you to decide?
No, it was really straightforward for me. This was the third. Don't forget, was the third cancer. It was the second breast cancer. We knew by then that high radiation levels of treatment, which they were still doing in the 80s and 90s, on young women caused breast mutations. Therefore, we were at far, 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 far higher risk of breast cancer than anybody else in the general population. So it was perfectly obvious that the healthy breast would go. And I remember just sitting, I'd read the reports that had come out of ASCO the previous year. And I literally just sat down with the surgeon the first time I met him, and I said, is this the time that we have the conversation about a double mastectomy? And he said, if you're ready for it, then this is when we have it. And that's what we did. All I said to him was, please make it neat. I want it smooth. I want it clean. And he did.
Now, I know you found great solace when you read the story of Barbie Ritzko, the US Marine, who discovered she had cancer while on a tour of Afghanistan. And she became a bit of an icon, didn't she?
Barbie was one of the change makers in my world. I had spent a year between December 2011 and the very beginning of 2013, dealing with problems, again, very, very Margaret Bourke-White. I had to solve problems myself. There was no information, there was no support for women who decided not to reconstruct after a bilateral mastectomy. And I felt very alone with that until I saw this picture of Barbie. David J will probably never know quite how many lives he changed with the work that he did on the SCAR project. But he brought together some of the women, some women who went on to form Flat and Fabulous. Barbie co-founded Flat and Fabulous in America with Sarah Bartovich Hamilton. Barbie's no longer with us, but Sarah still is, and Flat and Fabulous now has over 9,000 women as part of the group. That led, of course, to Flat Friends UK, which Gilly Cant over here formed in 2014, and of which I was part and still am. But I was very, very involved with that in the early days. And both of those things changed. It changed my life. It changed the way I saw things, but it's changed so much for so many people as well.
Of course, you had other problems, including heart problems. And here is what you describe as your ultimate selfie.
Yeah.
Looking at, now, this is a pacemaker, presumably.
Yeah, that's my pacemaker. That's my pacemaker sitting there. It's I love this picture. I sent it to one of my best friends who didn't know I was actually in hospital at the time and said, hey, what do you think of this as a selfie? Like, what? One of the things that happens with a lot of cancer treatment over a great number of years is it comes at a cost, and anybody that's been through repeated treatments will know that your cardiac, your respiratory, and your immune system are all under deep threat. And we didn't know it at the time, but I started blacking out, and it turns out that my cardiac damage was starting to tell. And so once they'd figured it out, I went down for an appointment to say, what do you think's wrong? And they said, right, we figured out what's wrong. Your heart's stopping for like lots of seconds at a time, and we can't let you go home. We'll find a bed for you, and as soon as we've got a slot in surgery, you're having a pacemaker.
Now, during this long period, you obviously struggled with your own mental health. You sought help for that, but did you ever feel suicidal?
It's a really tough one to answer. I spent so many, it's a really interesting parallel, and probably the ultimate irony, that my now ex-husband spent 2 or 3 years of his life trying desperately to die, and I spent that same 2 or 3 years trying desperately to live. In fact, I've been trying desperately to live since my first cancer, but it's there were times when I almost felt invisible. I had never, because of the way the kind of train of events just kept coming at me, I'd never really grieved for my parents. I'd never really dealt with the issues, just with the breakdown of the marriage and the abuse. But you know, while we continued to navigate his healthcare, I was also navigating my 4th cancer by then, because which had really debilitating chemotherapy associated with it. And by then we had separated. I had got to the point where I felt if I didn't leave this marriage, then I would die. And so that's what I did. But I really struggled for a while trying to be the strong one that was navigating and helping support my ex-husband through his issues. And I mean, I loved him. I still love him. I just don't trust him anymore. And that part of my life is no longer here. But
do you trust anyone?
I trust one person in this world, and that's my friend Sue.
So when you moved to Wiltshire and you began walking down country lanes with your camera, how did photography actually help you?
Photography had been helping me since the photograph at the beginning of She, actually, because it gave me purpose. I love being outside. I've always loved being outside. It's where I feel safest. And I found that whenever I went out, I went with the camera.
And that eventually went on this adult education course in Salisbury.
Well, this is the thing. I'd worked out this relationship between things that made me feel happy and my camera. And so first of all, I booked myself on an adult ed course while I was still in Tunbridge Wells. That was where I met Seamus Ryan, my most amazing first tutor. And by the time I got to Wiltshire, I then booked myself onto a creative photography course for a year with the Salisbury campus of Wiltshire College. And that's where She started to evolve. That's where, but one of the ways that I deal with big stress in my life is I write. And I don't necessarily write a lot or very well, but it's just, and it's a known therapy, I just write it out.
Well, you don't leave anything out of your blogs, do you?
No.
It's all there.
Well, it's my way of explaining, so I don't have to explain, if you know what I mean.
Actually, while we're talking, let's move on to the next couple of images from that Salisbury exhibition, because you can begin to see just the start of your associate panel, can't you? The way you're photographing yourself.
Yeah, very much so. I started to, the preparing for the end of year exhibition really helped focus me on what I was trying to portray. And you can see here, I was still in a very dark, very, very, not quite angry, but quite aggressive phase. These big contrasts, these harsh lighting situations, were very much me feeling my way around the issues that I was dealing with.
So you get your panel together, you've got a hanging plan, you go to an advisory day. What happened at the advisory day? I mean, here is your panel with your comments that were made at the time.
Yeah.
Was this the sort of thing you were expecting?
I didn't know what to say. I'd been to an advisory day before for my licentiate, so I knew they could be quite brutal, and I was totally prepared from that respect. So I thought, but I was the first one on after lunch, and so as my panel started to be put up in preparation, whilst people were still talking and everything, the room started to go really quiet as people started to notice. And all of a sudden, I got a real fit of the heebie-jeebies. And I realized that the only people I'd ever seen these pictures before, apart from me, was Bella and Sue. And I literally, I'd got sunglasses on. I was trying to hide at the back of the room. And then he asked me to read out the statement of intent. And that literally almost cracked me. I got through it. And he said the reason that he wanted me to do that was because it was long, and it literally was up to the 300-word mark. And he wanted me to think about the impact of that and whether or not it would be possible to shorten it slightly.
Well, we'll get you to read that in a moment, but let's look at the final panel. Did the final hanging plan change much from what we've just seen?
Yeah, it did. They were basically from the original one at the advisory day. They took out 4 and replaced with 3 from the spares that I'd taken. I took out another 1, which left us with 2 spaces. And those I filled with the 2 images that you can see here at number 4 and number 14. So
it was an improvement, you think?
Oh, without a doubt, without a doubt. The one that they didn't remove that I did was originally down at the number 14 slot, and I just didn't feel, I wasn't happy with it technically. The intention behind the photograph was good, but I wasn't happy with the precise execution of it in terms of just the way I'd caught it. I needed to be a little bit more in front of the movement, and I wasn't.
Right, well, there's no need to put your dark glasses on, but could you please now read us the statement of intent? And don't hurry, because the words mean a lot. And after that, we will see your images one after the other.
The sheet inside, portraits of myself. Survivors of disease, war, abuse, loss are often portrayed as proud, scarred warriors, and we are. But this is not the everyday reality of our lives, and nor does it reflect the emotional traumas we confront long after our bodies have healed. As a survivor of 4 cancers and heart failure, I am no stranger to corporeal destruction, so my decision to reject reconstruction and stay flat after my bilateral mastectomy was perhaps natural. It was other life-changing parallel events, including the breakdown of my marriage and the death of my parents, that did more visceral damage, and as I recovered, I questioned what it means to survive when everything you were once has gone. Survival is not something you get through, it's just what you are until you're not. I am changed and must come to terms with what's left, even if I sometimes feel like a living ghost and often wonder that others can see me at all. As a portrait photographer, I wanted to challenge how I see myself in contrast to how others perceive me, or the self I present to them. To explore identity and change, and consider why I can make an image of myself that I recognize, and yet others cannot. Using self-portraiture was hugely challenging, but it was the only truly authentic way to do this. So here is a visual story of a she that is mine. I know intimately both her sadness and her resilience. Perhaps the true self is a fleeting, ephemeral thing. Perhaps there is no single self, only moments of now, when we are the sum of the moments that went before. All photographs are taken by me alone.
Very powerful panel, we should say, entered into the contemporary genre of the distinction set up. What were you aiming for? Were you looking to try to get a different mood for each image?
Yeah, it's a story. It's not a linear story. Nothing ever is. But there is there's a beginning and an end, without a doubt. Those points are really clear. And in the middle, it's a real mixture of the darkness and the light, to coin Iñárritu's phrase. It's a mixture of loss and grief, of hope, of sadness and safety, I guess.
How difficult was it to photograph yourself?
You have no idea how many images it takes to make a body of work like that. For the last part, bear in mind, I was incredibly lucky to be taken on by Bella West. She was my mentor for a year, from 2016 to 2017, and she's still an incredible mentor and friend. And she really helped me think about the project. I already knew where I was going with it, but she really helped me to think about it as a professional photographer. And her guidance helped me to think much more clearly about what it was I was trying to portray and how I needed to tell that story. Because what I was trying to show, and you know, I call myself a bit of a brinkman. I've always set myself huge challenges all of my life, but to set myself up to photograph a project that involved feelings seemed to me a pretty crazy thing to do at many points throughout this project. But you approach it like anything else. You storyboard, you think things through, you research, you take inspiration from the greats and the unheard ofs. You bring everything that you've learned about yourself, about your life, about photographers like Vivian Maier and Margaret Bourke-White into the equation, and what you end up with, hopefully, if you've got it right, is something that speaks to other people. Not because the other people will hear what they want to hear, they will see what they want to see from my images. It's pointless me labeling them, because even I feel differently when I come back and look at them. But that's the idea, right? When you put a body of work out there, whether it's at a distinction panel or in any other medium or channel, when you give a body of work creatively to the world, it becomes the world's. It's not yours anymore. You've done it for you, but you've given it to everybody else.
Did you succeed in your own mind in showing the she inside?
Yeah, absolutely. Photography gave me a purpose, but more than that, it gave me a voice. And the she inside was my way of saying, I went through a really rubbish time. I felt unseen in that time. This is what it felt like in that time. And I'm really glad not to be there anymore.
So the great day arrives, the assessment. What happened?
I failed.
Why?
Because I didn't finish the goddamn job.
But you were meticulous in your preparation.
As photographers,
mirrors and things like that.
As photographers, we take responsibility from beginning to end, from cradle to grave of that image. And I didn't check. My photographs were professionally printed by a brilliant printer locally. Something went wrong on one of the images. There was a very slight banding. I didn't see it. I'd never even heard of banding until I
banding,
yeah. Banding. But there it was, plain as day once you saw it. It wasn't on the original image. And so I didn't technically fail. I got referred, which meant I just had to solve that print problem, and that was fine. But the thing is, it took another 7 months before the next panel reconvened. So that's how long I had to wait. And that was the biggest lesson and the longest 7 months of my life, I promise you.
But after what you'd been through, it must have seemed like a minor carbuncle.
Oh no, it was huge. I would rather have cancer again than bloody I don't really.
So
But honestly,
you finally become an associate. You get your certificate and your badge, among other things. How did it feel?
that's a really interesting question, actually. How did it feel? I felt validated, not just in the story that I told. I felt validated that people had understood. And I have to say, Tessa Mills, I think, was the chair for the original assessment. And the words that she said afterwards, and that she wrote in her summary, or the eventual summary, just summed it up for me. She just totally got it. Everybody did. And the fact that people understood that the images had done their job and explained something that I had found really difficult to put into words at the time was absolute vindication and validation. But more than that, it was when you start a new career in your 50s, it's really easy to fall victim to imposter syndrome. You're surrounded by incredibly talented people who have been practicing their art for 20, 30, 40 years. And I had only picked up a camera in earnest the day I walked into Seamus Ryan's classroom in 2014. And I turned professional in 2017. And for me, achieving the associateship, and the same year I also achieved my licentiate in the British Institute of Professional Photography, that to me was, yeah, okay, you've got this, you can do this. And finally, all of that self-confidence that I hadn't had, the confidence in my work, it really, really helped me to feel that I had some authority in this space.
Well, we'll come on to your professional career in a second, but I'd just like to say that soon we'll be opening up the chat bubble at the bottom of the screen for questions. So if you'd like to ask Sarah anything at all, and you can see how open she is about her life, then please type in succinctly into
what you wish for.
Chat bubble. Okay, now, of course, you are a professional photographer now, and given all you've been through, it is a huge achievement, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is. Not least, one of my biggest trepidations when I started this course was photography is renowned for being quite a technical subject. And not only am I not technical, but by then I'd got so much chemo brain that I didn't know if I could learn something this technical and this new.
And this is your godson, Alfie. Lovely image.
This is the beautiful Alfie. Yeah, nothing but natural light here and natural, beautiful, gorgeous godson.
So do you ever use lighting, or is it usually natural light?
Always natural light.
Yeah. And of course,
studio lighting terrifies me.
And you do adults as well, don't you? Here's Ed. That looks a posh place. Where's that?
This used to be the financial headquarters of the National Trust. It's Haywood House, and it's now the most amazing co-working and private business space. It's a members-only business space. And this was taken in the Treasury room. Ed is a financial expert. He's a financial specialist. So it was very fitting here. And I just like the juxtaposition of the authority of the wood paneling along with the image of one of the forefathers of Haywood House.
This was your idea, was it not his?
No, it was my idea, yeah, totally. I knew exactly, when I met Ed, I knew exactly where I wanted to photograph him.
I think you were right. And let's have another one of Alfie, because it's such a lovely image.
Yeah.
Where was that taken?
When was it taken?
Where?
This is taken at Iford Manor in Wiltshire. It's the most incredible historic house. This isn't inside the house. This is in it's the beautiful Renaissance gardens created by the Peto Gardens. Peto.
And then the next image is rather different because it's a tranquil landscape. You were saying in some respects you're a bit like Don McCullum. You need a bit of peace sometimes in your images. Well,
and this takes us right back to the first Margaret Bourke-White image of the Sierra Madre in California. I think there is something, it feels to me, and I don't know, Don McCullum's spoken a lot about his desire for dark landscape work following the traumas of his own life and the images that he's seen. And it was the same with Margaret Bourke-White. And I just wonder whether there's a connection with trauma and the need to seek peace and light in the stillness of the landscape. I've always been drawn to being outside. It's the place that I feel safest. It brings me peace, it brings me stillness. And this kind of image, to me, this is still a portrait. This is a portrait of the land. And it's got people in it, but I'm distant from them. I see them from a way off, and it grounds me. I find something incredibly calming in looking at images like this.
Is it also because you're safe, you're away from these people?
I think that definitely plays into it, and I think there's also something to do with the fact that I'm outside, which means that I can leave if I want to.
And now we have an image of you taken earlier this year, a selfie. This is you. And when you look at yourself now, what do you think?
Well, I don't really know how to answer that, because you'd think that by now I'm a bit fed up with looking at myself. I think how far I've come. I know how much I've changed. It's interesting, this particular picture is taken inside my cottage here. This cottage is the first inside place I've truly felt safe in, probably in my life. And there's something to be said for that wood that you see there. That wood has been there for 370 years. And I don't think me crazy, but I walk around my cottage touching the old wood and just remembering that I'm just a guardian here. I'm just passing through. And that gives me a real sense of connection, a real sense of place. This is genuinely a picture of me in my home.
Are you proud of what you've achieved?
Yeah. Yeah, I can say that now. There are many things I'm not proud of in my life. I have really rubbish decision making at times, not being the least of them. But I've come a long way. And I've never really had a plan. This is probably the first time, doing what I do now is probably the first time I've actually ever planned to do something and actually done it. And anybody that knows me will tell you, I'm a fantastic strategist, but implement something? No way. You'll wait forever because I'm waiting for perfection. But this grows with me, and I am proud of that. I'm not where I want to be yet, but I know where I'm going, and I'm okay with that.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much for being so searingly honest with what's happened to you. If you're okay with it, well, I'll get a few questions now.
Yep.
We've got people watching from all around the world. Are you still working on this project is the first question. Will it ever be finished?
That's a really, really, really good question. Technically, the she inside is finished. I don't know whether there is another body of work there. I don't know. I don't, there is definitely, the she inside is a story of loss and pain and recovery from that. Whether there is another story to be told about what comes next, I don't know. Watch this space.
What projects are you working on at the moment?
I work on the things that matter to me, and I work on work. So I work on things for my village. My village means an enormous amount to me. I care about the people of Keeville enormously. Coming to Keeville, I didn't know this village even existed before I moved here, and it has welcomed me into its bosom, she says, noting the irony, without question, and I owe them a very great debt of friendship. I also would like to be slightly more supportive of my flat friends. I have been in the past. I have not been so involved since I launched the business. I should probably get back to them. But mostly I want to be a good friend, and I want I want to make people that care about me proud. And that includes me. And it pretty much is that simple, actually.
Here's an interesting one. Had you failed your associate submission, would you have tried again?
Yes, without a doubt. The story was a good one. I always knew, I know that the story has power, that it speaks to people, and and on many levels. There's not a person listening to this or in the world that hasn't faced trouble and daunting times in their life. Everybody goes through it. It's not a hierarchy. There's no my trauma was bigger than your trauma. There's just our trauma. There's your trauma and my trauma, and we deal with it according to our own values and our own experiences. But I've forgotten what the question was.
Don't worry. We'll move on. Someone says, have you got
my brain for you.
Have you got any advice to someone who wants to overcome a sense of fear?
Well, I could be really trite and say do it anyway, but that would be trite. Your fear's your fear. Feel your feelings. They have value, but try not to let them stop you forever, because otherwise the fear wins. And I'd rather be on the winning side.
Are you working on a fellowship is the next question.
Yes, but I don't know when I'm going to be ready for that. The fellowship is an extraordinary leap in technical capability, and I think I still have a bit to learn.
Question from me about that. Do you feel the same intensity about what you're trying to achieve as you did with the associate panel? The same commitment and drive?
That is a really, really, really good question. And here is my fellowship quandary. I love, and this is me all the way through my life, I like to tell big stories. I like to work on big things. They have to move me, or they have to make me feel that something is bigger than me. So although I've got 1 or 2 projects in mind, there's nothing that really feels big enough yet. And that is both, there is a slight problem with that for me, because I don't know whether I'm seeking the impossible and I'm looking for something that is just too big, and missing the smaller stories that I could grow, or whether the really big story just hasn't arrived yet. I don't know.
Do you do much post-production on your images? Is the next question.
No, my style is very much, another great friend, Mike Brown, is very fond of saying, cameras don't take pictures, people do. And all of the work that you've seen in the Shein side has been done in camera. There's no special effects there. There's not even any double exposures. Anything that you see that you think is like that is just me moving. All of the work comes from me as a subject. I process, you didn't ask if I was frightened of anything in this world. I'll tell you what I'm frightened of in this world: Photoshop. Photoshop scares the living daylights out of me. I don't get it. I will, if I can't make an image the best it can be in Lightroom, then I'll go out and take another image. I'm not interested in the genre of work that says I'm creative in the digital darkroom. My creativity goes on in what it takes to produce that image. Once that's done, if I can't make it the image that I want from what I've got, I'll try again, and I'll keep trying. This is why it goes back to your question about how long does it take to, how long did it take to build them? I've got thousands of images because it takes patience, it takes work.
So as much in camera as possible, rather like your early female heroines in photography.
Absolutely, everything is in camera, and it goes back to, there are people working in this space now like Bella West, who, when it comes to the work she does with natural light, location work, in camera work, the woman is incredible. And you say, where do I want to go? If I could get half as good as Bella West, do you know what? That will be my life complete.
What advice, the next question says, what advice would you give to someone who really wants to progress in photography?
Why do they even have to ask the question? If you want to progress, work at it. Do you know what? Seamus Ryan gave me a great piece of advice one time. He used to say to us when we turned up for class, what did you do this week since we last saw each other to improve your photography? And when we couldn't answer him, he was like, well, what are you doing here then? And the reality is, you know, if you want to get good at something, you have to work at it. You will doubt yourself, you will lose confidence in yourself, you may even lose faith in yourself sometimes, but if you want it, you just have to keep going. You will take a lot of bad pictures, but one day you'll take a good one, and those days will come more and more frequently the more you keep trying. So just keep going, educate yourself, do your research. Every single day, pick up your camera and take a picture.
Good advice. Next question. Where do you see yourself in 5 years' time?
If it was just me and Sue talking, I'd probably say, well, frankly, I'll be lucky to be alive in 5 years. 5 years ago, I wasn't expecting still to be here. So quite frankly, the simple answer is, if I'm still lucky enough to be living where I'm living, doing what I'm doing, with the friends that I have, the brilliant people that support me, then that's good enough for me.
And the last question is, the She Inside, quite a project. Did you actually enjoy doing it?
Oh God, at times, no. I fucking hated her, sorry. At times, I really, really, if I'd had any breaths left for her to get on, she'd have got on them. One of the things about a long-term project, that I always had the writing to go back. I knew where I was going and I knew what to say, but there comes a point in a project where you're so close, you're almost over the line, but that last little bit getting over the line takes such goddamn effort. And I can't tell you the incarnation was probably between the advisory day and the assessment day, which was probably another 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, I can't remember now. But the incarnations I went through to get those last 2 images, the things that I tried, you would not believe.
Oh, tell us.
Oh, I played with frames, I played with work indoors, work outdoors. I took pictures in the bedroom, I took pictures in the lounge, I took pictures in the garden, I took pictures in Brian's barn. I tried just about everything, and it was interesting. The ones that worked in the end weren't anything that I worked really, really hard at. They were really serendipitous. The first one was number 4, actually, and Bella had said to me, I'm missing the vulnerability. You need to get naked again. And I said to her, Bella, you do realise that people can see me in my garden? And she's like, well, all I'm saying, I'm just saying. So that was where that one came from. And it was a different day, but similar location, same location, but from the other side. And what made that, and I was definitely seeking then a more peaceful, a more healing kind of image, was number 14.
Stuart, can we have the, Stuart, is it possible to get the hanging plane up again?
It's the one with the cat. Yeah, it's the one with the cat. And literally Tom, my cat, just jumped up as I was taking the picture, and I got off 3 shots. The first one obviously was facing the wrong way, but then he heard the click. And so the second one,
the hanging plan of the
one.
associate panel. Let's get the hanging plan of the associate panel up if we can.
Quickly roll through. No,
Not that one.
Keep going. Stop, back.
That's it.
Stop. So number 14, you can see here, 3 shots. The first one, Tom wasn't looking, he was looking at me. The second shot is that one, he'd heard the camera click and turned to face the camera. The third one was literally his tail disappearing out of shot. It was literally that. And that, for me, and I use it on in parts of my website, I think, it's just that, it's a real decisive moment, obviously, but it's just in the first shot, the grass is like tears, and it's specifically composed for that. But in this shot, and I'm deliberately out of focus, you know, the focus is on the grasses in front. But it's just this bringing together of happy things in my world. And it feels like a very natural part of this story, that there is peace as well as loss.
Well, that is a great note to end on. It's all we've got time for, and we do hope you've enjoyed tonight. And I really would like to thank you very much, Sarah, for your astonishing honesty and courage. It is an incredible story, and we wish you all the very best for the future.
Well, and I wish everybody else luck too. Everybody goes through tough times, and I wish you all kindness and health in that.
Thank you very much. Now, if you've enjoyed tonight, maybe you might consider joining the Royal Photographic Society. We have a special offer of 20% off at the moment, and we welcome photographers at all levels. And there's a tremendous amount of help available, both online and in person. And if you're already a member and refer a friend to join the society, you'll get 3 months free membership, and your friend will still get 20% off. So it's a pretty good deal. Details on the screen now. Now, next week, Distinction Talks take a break. But the week after that, we have Ria Michal FRPS, an unusual portrait photographer who achieved her fellowship with images of children and their favorite animals. And she'll be talking to Sue Brown, FRPS. And the following week, I'll be talking to Trevor Yerbury, FRPS, about his lifelong love of nude portraiture. And he is a 4th generation photographer. So it'll be interesting to compare his nudes with those of his grandfather. So with grateful thanks again to Sarah Dow and to the production team of Stuart Wall and Andy Moore, it's good night from all of us here at the Royal Photographic Society.